Good morning. I feel like this kind of lots of folks from out of town. As a native Texan, I would just like to nominate myself the welcoming committee. Welcome to Texas. Enjoying one of our notoriously mild summers, and it's good to be here with you. We might have a little technical something on the slides. Oh no, we're rocking. Great. Well, it doesn't go backwards. You guys back up? There we go. Sweet. I'll talk to you a little bit this morning about a few things. First, and Matt just said it, I have kind of a foundational view for what we do professionally day to day, and that is that Bitcoin's already won. It's just not broadly evenly recognized. The way that monies get adopted is just foundationally different historically than the way that technology gets adopted. So Bitcoin lives in this kind of overlap place, and so this statement here, it's seemingly contradictory. Two things that almost seem in conflict can both be true. First, if you're a Bitcoiner and you've been around for a little while, you probably have heard people say, maybe even feel yourself, there's almost like this innate sense that really inevitability for Bitcoin and its ultimate full-scale adoption, that it has actually won, and ultimately everyone will recognize that it is the monetary layer in the internet age. On the other hand, we can also just acknowledge that the circuitous path to achieving that future inevitability is completely unclear. We don't know time scale. We don't know massive drivers for that kind of adoption. So even though those two statements seem to be in conflict, they can actually both be true. We have a specific view, and the way that we play our role within the greater Bitcoin community is by backing founders that are building on the Bitcoin stack and helping to do what we think achieves a lot of Bitcoin's promise, and in fact actually pulls that future inevitability closer to the present by doing a lot of experimentation and hypothesis testing with users to find things that they need. And a couple of these are very broad categories. I don't want to spend too much time on them, but basic functionality like liquidity exchange, moving from fiat to Bitcoin, or if you need to, I know I, for one, pay my lease and most of my bills in dollars. So there obviously is an exchange and liquidity function there around credit markets with what we think is, arguably the best, and I think is actually the best, most pristine collateral ever known by mankind. And so highly saleable, highly liquid, understanding the actual risk profile around a credit arrangement, new kinds of products and services, applications to specific domain expertise, to specific sectors that only entrepreneurs that have been in spending their careers around that can actually really have the light bulb moment of how that's a game changer. Bitcoin in that context is an absolute game changer. Also, platform and integrations for developers. Those kinds of integrations make rapid application development, new kinds of products much more quickly attainable, and lots of other applications. So we just, as a first principle, we feel like that it's the companies that are building in, on, around the Bitcoin stack that help achieve that inevitability and move the needle. I've been around since the early days with Bitcoin, and kind of quietly on purpose. There's been a lot of false narrative that have been bandied around in the crypto investment space. And on the one hand, it's almost easy to forgive some of that because of all of the startup activity elsewhere. We take a very specific Mark Zuckerbergian approach to moving fast and break things, and it just turns out that when you're talking about the internet's base monetary layer, that does not work, not in the least. And it's really important to recognize that that's a foundational difference, and being different, that sort of necessitates a very purposeful, methodical approach to making any kinds of changes to Bitcoin core, any kind of proposed consensus changes. So if I were in that other camp, I might say, well, Bitcoin development's just too slow. And my personal biggest nit is the idea that innovation is not happening on Bitcoin. I think that's just patently false. In fact, progress has happened. The Lightning Network, which just kind of level set, I'm curious if you've ever used the Lightning Network in any way. Could you raise your hand? Great. That's probably 45-50% of the audience. That's awesome. It can start to feel almost like magic. And for all of the promises of moving other value stores away and all these other, shitcoins, smart contract platforms, etc., it's extremely expensive to move value. It solves no foundational problem about, an extractive approach where the Visas and MasterCards of the world are getting a free ride on 3.5-4% of every transaction that happens on the internet. What are we really solving over there? And I would say actually absolutely nothing, but the extraordinarily low cost, the near instantaneous at global scale internet native capacity with the Lightning Network, and very importantly, when you have it, it's yours. It's property. There's full finality there. And so that's just foundational. So that extreme low cost to move value around on the Lightning Network is important. So that to say this, 2017 segregated witness was merged into Bitcoin Core. That was a technical prereq for the Lightning Network experimentation to even begin. More recently, November 2021, Taproot has been merged into Core, and that's giving rise to Taproot Asset Protocol and a lot of other experimentations that just weren't possible at that point. So these are actually going to be very powerful technical enablements that allow entrepreneurs to think, like they have their individual Lightning light bulb moment of, I can actually do that on the Bitcoin stack. And 2022, 2023, 2024 is what I believe will be, in hindsight, an inflection point where lots of entrepreneurs that we had never even met before are realizing this is where I actually want to build. I want to build on the money because I actually see that that's a sustainable future. What's going to be possible with some of these tech enablements, including Taproot Asset Protocol. Bitcoin and the Bitcoin stack has actually had some might say a disadvantage. We've certainly not participated to date around one important and highly validated market, and that is price stable US dollar or euro pegged assets. Taproot Asset Protocol is nearing readiness to actually enable that directly on the Bitcoin stack. Why is that important? I'm a Bitcoiner. I want that beautiful future, where we're fully integrated and starting to think unit of account wise in Bitcoin terms in terms of sats. However, that is a long circuitous path. Dollar pegged assets directly on the Bitcoin and Lightning stack is actually going to be a huge deal for a few reasons, some of which are macro. It's no surprise that there is a global thirst for dollars because of the needs for international trade, and that so many commodities are priced in dollars to date. So two outcomes happen for most nation states, and we see this more recently in Argentina. There's a political candidate that says we're going to dollarize. We're going to stop what we're trying to do, which is manipulate our own fiat currency. Then inevitably you're subject to hyperinflation or some very, very high level of inflation, or you dollarize for something that looks like price stability in your local jurisdiction. And so he's saying, let's do that. Most of the regimes like this of the world, there's a limit on the amount of physical dollars that you can get into those countries. As it turns out, a clinical assessment of every token platform that's out there, there is one and only one that's actually decentralized from any reasonable objective assessment, and that's the Bitcoin stack. So what that means is that inevitability, that unstoppability for some of these jurisdictions that actually have a thirst for dollars, it's going to probably be like a giant Hoover once we have dollars that are riding around on the back of sats. And by the way, it inherits all the promise of Lightning, that extremely low cost, near instantaneous, fully final settlement. So this outcome, which is near term, actually can lead to some strange and maybe unanticipated, some might say unwanted outcomes, where that reality actually extends the shelf life of the US dollar. Why I think that actually is ultimately a good thing is that moving in a SAT Bitcoin native context, it's very easy for someone that thinks, I just really want to save. Oh wow, I have some number of dollars in my hot wallet. I'm going to swap that instantaneously for extremely low cost, and now I'm actually saving in Bitcoin. That gets us closer to the wallets of the world, and candidly, the places that could really benefit from some sort of ability to save at low transaction costs. And another big macro impact that's going to actually make that possible, because Lightning didn't exist. Another factor that's necessary is that 5 or 6 years ago, there weren't 3 or 4 generation old smartphones where people could actually have something at an achievable price for these global markets outside the United States. And it's a non-trivial amount of market capitalization. As of yesterday, there was in dollars only, excluding every other fiat in the world, there's about 120 billion locked up in various smart contract platforms in dollars. If I need dollars to pay bills, I would like for that to be living in a Bitcoin native context, and that's the reality that's coming. What's also really exciting is we're at a moment where there are a variety of different factors that are starting to move toward a flywheel. We have obviously Bitcoin Core and some of these layer 1 tech enablements. There's a lot happening on the Lightning Network. Also, there's some new business model experimentation, which I think today are still really the hypothesis testing phase, but it's really exciting, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it in a minute. But value for value being one, it's just this high level idea that when I drive value for an individual, another business, and I get consideration in real time, I'm getting value for having provided value. And this is, at a very foundational level, you might just intuit that isn't the way the internet really should work if it's possible. And so we're getting very close to that, and some companies are starting to play with it. And I have to say, this is just a whole lot of fun, which I encourage you to try. Multi-asset, first and foremost, this price stability on the Bitcoin and Lightning stack, that's coming soon. And new design primitives that are getting some early validation at the intersection of these technologies and business models, as well as things that are very Bitcoin adjacent, like NOSTR, which we think social media platform, but it's actually a communications coordinating network that can do all kinds of what I think are going to look like magic, potentially in the next few years if it continues to grow and get some adoption. I want to talk a little bit about one of those design primitives right now. NOSTR is really early. It's very experimental. Actually, NOSTR was sort of born out of an open source project from one of our companies, Zebedee. In fact, most of the monetized relays are actually Zebedee code, and that was an open source initiative that's gotten a lot of early excitement and traction, especially in the wake of deplatforming and this sort of thing. One of the things that's great about the experiment with NOSTR is we don't know if in 5 or 10 years NOSTR will have evolved and will be the clear winner. But what this kind of early robust experimentation does put a light on is some of the things that have actually gotten validation. There's this idea of a zap, and I don't want to be pedantic. Are you familiar with NOSTR and a zap? Raise your hand. About the same amount. It's just very simple. If you use Facebook in the past or Twitter or some other social platform, everyone knows you can like a post. If you take a step back and think about that user behavior on the product, it's actually a really fiat sort of thing. There's zero marginal costs. You're not actually expressing value to that creator of content. You're kind of giving a thumbs up, which, I mean, it literally looks like a thumbs up on Facebook, but that's it. There's no marginal cost to do it. It can be gamed. What if there were, like, you induce some value, like even a very, very small amount? And so with NOSTR, this idea that instead of just likes, you can zap somebody and send a very small expression of purchasing power to that person to recognize what they said gave value to you, and it can be a very small amount. They just call it a zap. So it's the like paradigm. There's something that is very satisfying as a user, knowing that is going directly to the person. It's not going to some marketing intermediary that owns the platform. They're taking 70%, and then maybe a fraction of a penny gets to the person. It's directly to their Lightning wallet. It's very powerful. And with that, I would say that for me, in value for value, that expression of value, the zap is an absolutely validated design primitive. So the learning there, it almost doesn't matter in a sense if NOSTR is the ultimate winner, because what we've learned and the way that rapid adoption works is you'll take the design primitive, you'll borrow aggressively, and what is absolutely market validated, that'll get incorporated into other products. Just a couple of stats there. There's been about 1.6 million-ish. It's a little funky to count in NOSTR terms. Individual expressions of value in that way that are totaling to a roughly 1 billion sats, which over most of the hype cycle around NOSTR, the early one at least, has been since the holidays last year to now. So that'll give you a sense of timing and expression. This value for value idea, though, I'm really double tapping on it today because it's incredibly powerful. Like I mentioned, there's something satisfying about it, but it opens up entirely novel ways to connect with the people that you value and to acknowledge directly. In fact, in a safe and secure, private, not destroying the privacy way, if you're a musical artist, so between the artist and the fan, the writer and the reader, the speaker and the listener, the creator and the benefactor or patron, you can actually interact in the internet age safely in a very novel way. And I have to say, one of our portfolio companies is moving in this space very early, and it happens to be run by artists and successful entrepreneurs. They just see all the flaws with the publishing industry and how this opens up a new way for artists to take their music, their creation, and work directly and open up new ways to engage with them in a very powerful way. And to be a fan of someone that's on the rise and the rising star in the music world, it's kind of fun and cool to be able to get it to them, and they'll acknowledge that you commented on their page. It just feels fundamentally different than it ever could in these other kinds of no value, zero marginal cost, hey, I like what you're doing, kind of a audience place. By the way, no one can take that platform away from them. If they manage to build a massive crowd there, it's theirs in perpetuity. So very powerful. You can think of that Zap and that value for value thing. It's sort of like disintermediating the micropayments that we've talked about for 20 years in the internet world, and we've just not gotten there because until Lightning on the Bitcoin stack, it doesn't economically make sense. And if you want to send money to someone and you're using ACH rails, there's clawback for at least up to 90 days for that. It creates a risk book. It doesn't actually drive innovation, and it doesn't capture what we all know to be the sound money piece, which is so formative to the Bitcoin stack. And so I want to talk a little bit about a specific example of something that's happened just in the recent weeks, this summer. There's a young woman named Ainsley Costello, and she's a music artist. She's a writer, a singer, and she's been creating art since she was around 14 years old. She's, I believe, 19 years old today. By the way, I would encourage you to scan that QR code and go just check out one of her songs a little later. It's very fun, and I must say, expressing real value directly to the artist, I find it a little addictive. I'm just kind of sprinkling sats all over Wavelake. But what happened with Ainsley and her story is so powerful to me. It's such a real human story, and we need so many more of those on the Bitcoin stack. Ainsley, over about 5 years, put out 25 songs on roughly, I think it was 66 different, from Spotify's, etc., for her music. And after 5 years, the grand total of money she was able to earn was $750. And by the way, there's like a 3 to 6 month lag on them getting your small number of pennies into your bank account that's going to charge you to keep the money there, etc. This summer, in a period of 3 weeks, a track that was released on Ainsley's profile as a result of some conversations that happened at Bitcoin Park in Nashville. In about 3 weeks, she made over $1.5 million sats. Roughly, call it plus or minus $500 USD equivalent in 3 weeks. Not life-changing money yet, but Ainsley has become an absolute evangelist for Bitcoin and Lightning. She has friends that are in the music industry in the Nashville area. There's a track that I understand is going to be released with a new friend of hers that's very new to Bitcoin and Lightning. And this is how it starts. And it's not because she knew everything about Bitcoin. She couldn't really, I don't know if she was able to articulate the properties of a sound money and these kinds of ideas, but it solved a very important financial question for her in her business and her life. And you can see very quickly how in 3 weeks you get to about $500. If you're an aspiring musician, that actually might encourage you with the right incentives to produce even better, more polished, more professional, more appealing kinds of content to a wide audience that is necessarily grassroots because of where we are in the cycle. And I wanted to share that with about Ainsleys. Now, when we invest, it's not something that's as simple usually as what looks like a music player. Oh, that's cool, and it's wired up to lightning, but there's always something much bigger and fundamental that's happening under the hood. The two founders of WaveLake, being musical artists and experienced entrepreneurs, they saw all the flaws in the music publishing industry that goes back hundreds of years. Famously, from artists like Elvis on down, there's this almost like slave or like highly extractive nature of the music publishing industry today. They're building distribution plumbing so that you don't have to go to WaveLake, although you should, to experiment with it so that this music can get disseminated, the payments are native in sats, and can get ingested by other platforms. And so to Ainsleys' story, Adam Curry, famous podcaster, gave a mention. And on the back end on the platform, through Mr. Curry's distribution, there was a massive stream, pages and pages of 63 sats on an individual basis where hundreds of people were thinking like, holy shit, I really like this track. Who is this? What's happening? You know, that's just really exciting. And it's so human and so powerful. I wanted to share that with you. But under the hood, you know, they're building a distribution model that at the end of the day, with a little luck and a lot of use by Bitcoiners and new Bitcoiners in the future, can actually potentially disrupt at the technology level the music industry, music publishing industry, full stop, which I think is very exciting. You know, those kinds of what ifs and you need to get a little lucky along the way and be smart in your approach. Entrepreneurs face all kinds of risks when they're building a company. You know, there's career risk. There's opportunity cost on what you could be making by being in a large corporation somewhere. There can be emotional risks. There can be impacts to your family and the challenges that you're going through on that journey. And I would just, as a foundational, you know, TVP would assert and share the idea that of all of the necessary risks that an entrepreneur must face, given the choice, they will never accept platform risk from any sort of platform. So choosing a non-decentralized kill switch controlled, you know, Ethereum or some other platform to do what someone like Ainsleys wants to achieve, it's not going to happen when they realize, light bulb, oh wow, it's possible I can do that directly on the Bitcoin stack. I'm in. We see it all the time. That actually is starting to accelerate. TVP is in a very unique position to be able to really instrument the universe of Bitcoin native companies up and down around the Bitcoin Lightning stack, et cetera. And so after monitoring for a couple of years, earlier this year we published some similar research, we think, that's meant to challenge some of those assumptions I talked about with institutional investors. The innovation's not happening on Bitcoin. So no surprise, equity markets last year down big, crypto markets down bad. So in the face of that kind of environment, one of the interesting things about Bitcoin Native in 2022, it grew 52.9% as a class in terms of total transactions. Bitcoin is becoming a platform, and that phenomenon with entrepreneurs is going to actually accelerate. We just see it's palpable. There's massive latent demand to build directly on the Bitcoin stack. In Jackson Hole earlier this year at our annual investor and founder symposium, the founders were leaning in, spitballing ideas while someone was on the stage presenting. It was visceral. You could feel it, and that's coming. So comparison. Crypto venture was effectively flat last year, and most of that activity happened in the first half of 2022. The second half, it fell off of a cliff. Another one that just really slaps pretty hard. If you added up every single value stable asset on every smart contract in the entire world, Bitcoin, the asset, is still market cap dominant. If you wanted to take that kludgy approach to adding it all up, 42.1% of all the venture dollars invested in 2022, Bitcoin native companies only got 1.31% of those dollars. There's a very clear, and this research is free to download on our website, by the way. We made that assertion that there's actually a clear misallocation of capital. Yes, we've been very methodical and purposeful, But right now, there's not situational awareness of what's happening directly on the Bitcoin stack for a lot of these institutional limited partners and other investors. And so firms like ours and others that are our colleagues in the industry have a very special opportunity for the next few years. And, let's, at the end of the day, it's been said by so many people before, at the end of the day, we all work for Bitcoin. For us at TVP, we just feel like this is an area that we have some unique talent and the ability to kind of peek around corners and do what we're doing when I show up every day to work for Bitcoin. And that's why we think that backing these kinds of founders is a very important piece to kind of looking at the future and that inevitability that we all see, and in the Texas way, sort of lassoing it and pulling that line a little closer to the future, to the present. And that's what we do, why we do what we do. And we probably have maybe just a minute for one question if someone has anything. Sure. Great question. Did Matt plant you over there? AI has been an interesting phenomenon since all of these crypto people with no sort of like philosophical direction that they're leaning into have infamously pivoted, we'll say. TVP's first fund and kind of like foundational strategy, because we were waiting for some of these technological enablements to get to where there's more just direct and sufficient deal flow that's Bitcoin native. Our first fund back years ago explored ahead of its time in some ways the intersection of Bitcoin technology, applied AI, and security and privacy. And right at that intersection, I've been talking about this for a few months now, and I think it's starting to get out there, and other people are seeing it now too, that if I'm a machine, I don't understand how to interact with credit. Like, can you imagine trying to open up a line of credit with another commercial trading partner? But what I'm doing is actually processing data for someone. So I think that not a few things are true. Number one, artificial intelligence, certainly general intelligence, won't work with fiat. They won't understand. They're like, why would we do this? Let's just transact immediately. We think 90 days is a long time for a human. 90 milliseconds is an eternity for a machine. And so we've been thinking about that for a whole long time, and being able to actually demand a certain amount of flow, monetary flow, for a machine for the service they're providing. And by the way, they know that they can. The great learning is that they can improve the way that they learn. So as they see resources they want to acquire, they're going to need value to express to get those resources to be even more efficacious to what they're doing and what the problems that they're solving. And so I think you only get there with extremely low cost, fully final. And guess what? It's Bitcoin and the Lightning stack. And so we've been seeing that coming for a long time, and we're just ahead of where that's going to become a reality. It's super exciting stuff, but you're about out of time. I appreciate your time and attention today. Great conference.
Grandpa, why do you have so much Bitcoin?
Well, it all started in the year 2023 when I attended a conference called BitBlockBoom.
What's BitBlockBoom, Grandpa?
It was a conference where people talked about Bitcoin. This was way back when we used something called the US dollar for money.
What? Bitcoin wasn't always the world's money?
If it weren't for great speakers at BitBlockBoom like Jimmy Song, Adam Curry, and Preston Pish, we'd all be living in pods and eating bugs. Instead, I was able to avoid fiat enslavement and secure generational wealth.
F***ing legend.
Be the legend your grandchildren deserve. Experience the best Bitcoin conference out there and join the Bitcoin revolution. BitBlockBoom, the only conference for true Bitcoin maximalists. Book your tickets today at bitblockboom.com and use the code BBB1 for a special discount.